Have you spent hours going through color grading tutorials, watched videos that seem too complicated, or simply just given up because color grading is too difficult, right? Well, if that sounds like you, you're in the right place. I spent years of my videos looking mediocre until I discovered a simple and effective method that even a complete beginner can follow along to, that allowed me to take my footage from this to this, and this to this, oh, and also this to this. If that sounds good, let's get started. Okay, to start, we're going to create 6 nodes, and to do that, you're going to press Option S. Alright, so we're going to name these nodes. Right click on the node, node label. The first one we're going to name white balance. Second one we're going to name exposure. Third one we're going to name saturation. Fourth one we're going to name curves. Fifth one we're going to name CST, which I'll explain that later. And the final one we're going to name LUT. Okay, so these are our 6 nodes we'll be using for this tutorial. I'm going to keep it super simple, and I'm going to run you through how we do each adjustment to get our image to go from this flat log image to our color graded final image. Now, the first thing that we need to do before we do any adjustments is make sure our project settings are correct. So if you go down to the bottom right hand corner here, you'll see a settings icon. You're going to click this here and you're going to go to color management. Now, if you're on a Mac, you need to make sure that both of these say Rec 709A. Okay, once you've done that, I recommend going to the top right hand corner here and clicking save current settings as preset, so that every time you open DaVinci Resolve, the settings will automatically be Rec 709A. So without going into too much details, we change these settings here just to make sure that our settings line up with the Mac display. So if this isn't changed, then when you export, your colors and contrast will look a little bit different to what you were viewing on the viewer. So just keep that Rec 709A if you're on a Mac, and then save. Okay, so the first thing that you want to do when you are color grading log footage, which is what we're using here, is you want to go into the CST node and you're going to add an effect called color space transform, which is this one down here, okay? So we're going to drag that on, and now you're going to see these options here. Now, the only ones you need to worry about are input color space, input gamma. So you're going to scroll down here, and depending on what you shot this on, you're going to select that profile. So for us, we shot this on a Sony FX3 in S-Log3. So we're going to select S-Gamut3, and the gamma space will be S-Log. Now that's going to convert this log image to a Rec 709 file. We can now close this, and now we're ready to start grading. It's just important that you do these steps in the beginning to get everything set up properly. So you may be wondering why we added this towards the end of the node tree. We do this because all the adjustments that happen before we convert our footage to Rec 709 are done in the log profile. So basically the point of shooting a video in log is you get more dynamic range and you get more control over the image. Our color space transform node then basically takes all that information and transforms it into Rec 709, which is a more compressed picture profile that most screens use. So you've got all this flexibility here with these main adjustments, then you're transforming it into a Rec 709 file here, which we then apply the LUT to after that. I understand that all sounds a bit complicated, but don't worry about the science behind it. You don't need to know that. All you need to know is the color space transform node goes at the end, just before the LUT. So once we've set this all up, we're now going to go to our white balance node. Now, if you look down here, this is a vector scope. You can find this one by selecting vector scope. You want to also just make sure that 2x zoom, show skin tone indicator, and show graticule are all selected. And that's going to give us a rough idea of where we need to have our white balance. So if you grab this offset wheel here, you're going to drag this so that the bulk of that scope is sitting around the center of that vector scope. Now, when it comes to using the vector scope, it's important to eyeball it as well. So use that as a rough gauge where you want your white balance to be. And if it looks good here and it looks good there, then you're probably in a pretty good spot. White balance as well can be a creative choice. So sometimes you might prefer a cooler image or a warmer image depending on the scene. So keep that in mind as well. If our white balance were to be way off like this, we'd see it here on the vector scope. Again, if it was too cool, it'd show here on the vector scope. So we're trying to get it to come somewhat in the center, and that will give us a fairly accurate reading of the correct white balance. In this situation, I want this to be a bit of a cooler image because it's an overcast day. So I'm going to have my white balance sit just about here, and that's a personal preference for it to be a bit cooler. All right, moving on. Now we're going to adjust our exposure. So if you look down the bottom left-hand side here, you'll see 4 color wheels. Now to get to this section, you're going to select this icon here, and then you're going to select this icon here. Now, lift, gamma, gain, what does that mean? Lift is equivalent to shadows, gamma equivalent to midtones, gain equivalent to highlights, and then offset is overall exposure. Now lift, gamma, and gain work a little bit differently to your traditional shadows, midtones, and highlights. The difference is they're a bit more of a softer adjustment. So if we were to go to our regular shadows, midtones, and highlights, if I adjust this, it's quite a harsh adjustment. You'll notice that it's just quite harsh. So you'll notice with the lift, gamma, and gain, it's a much more soft adjustment. So we're not crushing our shadows as easily or clipping our highlights. So I prefer to do the exposure using these wheels here. So on the right hand side, you'll notice this waveform. To get this, you're gonna select here, waveform. And then I like to also go in and use the Y option. You've got a few other options, but I find this one the easiest to use. Okay, so how do we read a waveform? And what exactly does it do? You'll notice on the left here, we've got numbers 0 to 100. These values indicate different levels of exposure. At 100, our highlights will be clipping. So if I bring this up here, once the highlights get to 100, you can notice in the image, we're noticing the image start to clip in the highlights. Alternatively, if we bring the shadows down, you'll notice that we start to get clipping here, and that's represented in the waveform. You'll also notice that the colors on the waveform also match the colors on the image. So it's showing here that our reds are this exposure and the blues are that exposure. So it's a nice way to see how exposed certain colors are in the image. Now I want to demonstrate how you can use the waveform to determine the contrast levels of an image as well. If we were to turn off our color space transform node, you'll notice now that this waveform is much more flat. So that's representing the lack of contrast in the log image. When we turn that back on, you can now see that our highlights are further towards 100 and our shadows are further towards 0, giving us more contrast in the image. So when we're setting our exposure, just be mindful of this as we're making our adjustments. We're going to use both what looks best here and what looks good here to make a good, well-rounded adjustment to our exposure. So in this image, we've got a bit of room for the highlights. I'm going to bring the gain up. Then our shadows are already quite dark, so I'm not going to touch these too much. I might actually bring up my gamma a little bit. And then I might bring the lift down a tiny bit as well. Just a slight amount. So as you can see, this is before, this is after. Before, after. So the image was a little bit underexposed. I've just gone and corrected that using my exposure here. The next step we're going to do is to add saturation. So I like to change the saturation using this tab here. Then what we can do is we can adjust the overall saturation by bumping this up. Maybe that much. I like that. Now we can also change the saturation of individual colors in the image. So say we wanted to change the blues and make them more saturated, then we could go into the cyan and we could bump up that saturation like so by using this right slider here. That's before, that's after. So we're just giving a bit more life to the image, and maybe it's a little bit too much, so I'll bring it down. That's nice. I find in color grading, less is often more. You don't want to make it too obvious that you've messed with the colors too much. If it's subtle, then it's much more tasteful and pleasing to the eye. The next adjustment that we're going to do is the curves. So if you come over to this tab here, you'll notice this curve. This is great for making a more harsh contrast adjustment and a nice finishing touch to what we did with the exposure. Again, looking at the waveforms here, we're going to bring our highlights up a bit to get them to pop, and then we'll just bring the shadows down ever so slightly. That's before, that's after. Just making the image have that little bit more contrast, and it's a bit more of a harsh adjustment than what we did with the exposure. Now the final step is to add the LUT. It doesn't matter what LUTs you use, any LUT will do, but for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to use the standard LUTs that come with the DaVinci Resolve so you can follow along. So you can preview them here to get an idea of what the image will look like. And I'm going to go for this one here, which is Rec 709 Kodak 2383 D65. So you double click that and we'll apply the LUT. Now you're going to notice that this image is way too overbaked. What we can do now is go into this icon here, and we're going to change the key output right down to about 0.2. Just a slight adjustment. I might even go less. That's before, that's after. Before, after. So it's a very, very slight adjustment, and it just keeps the image tasteful and not overdone. One of the biggest signs of cheap or amateur color grading is when the colors are just too crazy. It's always better to do less. Less is always more. All right, and that is pretty much it. I'm just gonna go in and make a few more adjustments because I don't like how dark these shadows are. I'm gonna go back into our exposure. I'm just gonna bring up that lift a little bit, just a tiny bit to about there. And I'm pretty happy with that. Bring that down and maybe that down slightly. All right, now if we look at our final image, that's before, that's after. Before, after. As you can see, that was a very simple process. I'm now going to show you how we would do that process on a variety of different clips in different environments. So, all right, so this is the next shot. We're going to add 6 nodes. And like before, we're going to add our color space transform. And because this was shot again on S-Log3, we're going to go down to S-Gamut Cine and S-Log3. All right, let's go back to our vector scope and let's start with our white balance. Again, quickly naming the nodes again so we know what we're doing. Looking at our vector scope, this white balance looks pretty good. We're just going to adjust it ever so slightly about there. And that's just making the white balance slightly more balanced. That's before, that's after. There's a bit too much green in the image. We've now corrected it, and we're going to move on to the exposure. So going back to the waveform, we notice here we've got a little bit of clipping in the highlights. That's okay. Not much we can do about that. And we've got a bit of room down here in the shadows. So we're going to bring the gamma down just a tad, bring the gain up a little bit. About there. Now, as I said before, we are clipping our highlights, but looking at the image, that's okay. That's the sun. We're not expecting that to be exposed correctly. So always make sure you use both your eyes on here at your own discretion, and then also the scopes of the waveforms down here. Make a balanced judgment. And I'm going to bring the lift down just a tad. That's before, that's after. Before, after, before, after. We'll just add a little bit more contrast to that. Moving on to our saturation node, we're going to add just a slight amount of saturation. About that much will do. And then we're going to move on to the curves. Again, adding a bit more pop. So bring the highlights up, shadows down, about there. Looks good. What you can also do in the curves that I didn't show before is you can change the hue and saturation using these as well. So in this image, because we've got lots of green going on, we can play around. Let's select some of these green tones. We can bump the hue to make it a bit greener or a bit warmer. I think the warm yellowish green really complements this image. So that's before, that's after. Just in here, I think it looks really nice. Gives that sunny, summery vibe. And then we'll move on to the final step, which is the LUT. Okay, going through our film looks, find something we like. I'm going to select the Fujifilm 3513DI D55. And again, with this LUT, I'm going to tone it back all the way. We'll go 0.2 before, after. And once you add the LUT, you may need to go in and make a few more adjustments. So I think it's a little bit too dark. I'm going to bring these gamma up a little bit. Bring the highlights down just a tad, and the lift. Now before, after, before, after. Our scopes look fine. We're aware that the highlights are clipping, but that's okay. That makes sense in the image. Moving on to the next clip. All right, so you'll notice that I've added in all 6 nodes, I've labeled them, and I've converted it from log to Rec 709. Now the first thing you're gonna notice is this image is quite underexposed. So for this grade, I'm gonna start with the exposure just to fix that. Gonna go into our waveform, and we're going to start by just bringing our offset up. Bring some exposure to the image, and then I'm gonna bring our gamma down a little bit, bring up our gain, just ever so slightly, and bring the lift down just a tad. Now in this situation as well, because we have these lights that are definitely clipping, as we can see here, I'd actually go in and make another adjustment, which is our highlights adjustment. Now what this does is it just affects the very brightest parts of the image. So if I was to bring this down, you'll notice that we have a little bit more detail coming back here. So if I undo that, that's before, that's after, before, after. It just brings back a little bit more detail in these lights, which I think is quite important in this image. Now you'll also notice down here that the majority of the image is falling on the lower end of the waveform. Now again, because this is a night shot, this is completely fine. Context is important. So if it was a daytime shot, obviously these readings would be showing much higher on the waveform, but because it is a nighttime shot, it makes sense for it to be a darker image. Now we're gonna move to the white balance. So I brought up the vector scope, and now looking at this image here, I like the look of these colors. I think these blues and purples look great, and I think it really fits the image. If you were purely going off the vector scope, this image would look wrong down here. If we were to bring it back to the center, we'd get an image that looks more like this. There's nothing wrong with this, but I personally prefer the stronger purples and blues just because it is a neon kind of vibe. So I'm gonna reset that. I'm just gonna make a slight adjustment and bring in a bit more blue just to offset that purple. Again, this kind of grade is purely down to personal preference. That's before, that's after. Before, after. So I've just added in a little bit more blue and green just to balance out the image so it's not so purple. Probably just bring it back even a tad. Before, after. All right, moving on, we've got our saturation. Now in this image, I want these colors to pop. So I'm gonna go back to the saturation and I'm gonna crank that up to about 1.24. Before, that's after. I think it looks great being overly saturated. Moving on to the curves, I'm gonna add a little bit more contrast, pop that up a bit and bring that down. Honestly, for this clip here, I don't even think it needs a lot. I'm pretty happy with how it looks at the moment. So we'll leave it like that. Moving on. All right, this is the next shot. This was shot on an anamorphic lens, hence why it's got that widescreen ratio. But again, we're going to start off with our white balance. We're going to have a look at our vector scope here. That's looking pretty good so far. Just play around with it. See what else we could do. I think just about there. Honestly, if we correct the white balance, it has more of a realistic look. But if we go back to what it was before, it looks a little bit more stylized. And honestly, I think I kind of like this more greeny, orangey look. I might even lean into it a bit. And we'll change the white balance about there. Honestly, I'm going to leave it as it is. I think I like what it's doing so far. We'll move on to the exposure. Looking at the waveform again. We've got quite a lot of room down here and up here, so let's add some contrast by first bringing down the midtone, so the gamma. Drag that down. Add in some gain. All right, that's before, after. Just a very slight adjustment, bit more contrast in the image, looking good so far. Next up, saturation. I think I might pump this. Could do with a lot of color. Let's add that in. Yeah, that looks great. Somewhere around there, I think looks good. All right, curves. We'll add in a bit more contrast first. Just add those highlights, shadows. Yep. And I want to play around with this in the hue. I want this blue to be a bit more cyan. So we're going to select that with the eyedropper tool. Just click that and you'll see our points here. Let's push that up a little bit to cyan. Yeah, that looks great. And then we might adjust some of these colors down here. Let's adjust these yellows, maybe make it a bit more greeny yellow. Yeah, honestly, I might even push that more to the cyan. I'm loving that. Awesome. All right, now you'll see that we do most of the work, honestly, with these 4 nodes here. This image already looks great. The LUT really is the finishing touch. You don't want to do too much work with the LUT. It's kind of like the icing on the cake. So we'll go and have a look what we've got. Our options. I think I like the look of this one, this Fujifilm 3513Di D60. Let's try it out. I'm gonna just crank that right back again. Try 0.2 before, after, before, after. I think that LUT definitely adds to the image. Maybe a little bit less, 0.15 before, after, before, after. And I might just go in and bring those shadows up just a tiny bit. Like that. I think that looks great. That's before, that's after, before, after. Image looks fantastic. Now, I should have showed you this in the beginning, but I want to show you what you would do if you were grading multiple shots that were similar. Open up the clips tab here. You're going to copy by pressing Command C and then paste Command V, and you'll get these adjustments to move over to the image. But for our sake, because I want to show you each image from scratch, I'm going to reset that. All right, so we've got our final image. This one again is shot on an anamorphic lens, so it's that widescreen image again. We've got our nodes laid out and they're all been labeled. So for the sake of this tutorial, I've gone ahead and messed up the white balance. So as you can see here, it's showing that we're way too off into the blue. We're gonna grab our offset wheel. I'm gonna drag that back somewhere about there. So we're just trying to get it to center up like that. Okay, that's the white balance fixed. Moving on to the exposure, we'll open up our waveform and we're going to go in and start. I think we can add some highlights. We've got a bit of room up here. Let's add the gain, pump that up a bit. Great. Maybe bring those gamma down and lift up gamma down again. Just massaging the image to get something that is pleasing. That's before, after. Bit more gain, bit less. I think that looks good. I'm happy with that. Let's just drag the image along here to get a better frame. Let's go with that. All right, moving on, we're gonna add some saturation. Let's go back to this tab, bump that saturation up a bit. I think that looks great. All right, and then we're going to move on to the curves. Make an S curve, grab the highlights and shadows down a bit. Before, after, image is popping, maybe looking good. And then we'll just go ahead and add a LUT. See what options we've got. Let's try, I like that Fujifilm one again, we'll reuse that one, but we're gonna turn that right down again. 0.15, before, after, before, after. All right, and that image looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. So that is the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it and I hope you found it useful. I tried to break that down as simply as I could. All the LUTs I use in the video come with DaVinci Resolve as well, so you don't need to worry about getting any extra LUTs or anything like that. Now there is one more thing that's actually even more important than color grading. And if you can get this one thing right, it will make all the difference between your footage looking amateur or pro. And that one thing is lighting. Click here to watch this video that will teach you everything you need to know about getting professional and cinematic lighting. I hope you guys enjoyed that video and I'll see you in the next one.